There is a free method that has kept wooden buildings standing for over 300 years, with zero rot, zero insect damage, and zero maintenance, using no chemicals, no synthetic coatings, and no purchased materials of any kind. Builders in 18th century Japan discovered that if you applied this method before nailing timber to the wall, that plank would outlast everything around it, including the people who built it. Yet, despite structures that are still standing today to prove its brilliance, the Western construction industry has spent the last century selling us something that needs replacing every 15 years. So what did those 18th century builders know that we don't? And how can we apply this technique to supercharge the lifespan of our lumber? Let's dive in. To understand where this came from, you need to understand the problems Japanese houses faced. By the 17th century, Edo, the city that would eventually become Tokyo, was one of the most populous cities on Earth. A dense lattice of wooden townhouses, merchant storehouses, and crowded residential streets, all built from timber, all packed tightly together, all permanently at risk. In the 260 years of the Edo period, hundreds of fires were recorded in the city, events so regular and so catastrophic that residents had a nickname for them, the Flowers of Edo. Here, the ability for your home to be fire-resistant was the difference between keeping what you had and losing everything to a neighbor's cooking fire. And as it always seems to be, the poorest in society were at the greatest risk. The wealthy could afford stone and plaster, but the merchant class could not. They had no option but to build from wood, which meant they were always one spark away from ruin. But over 300 years ago, a technique evolved to help prevent fires sweeping through entire neighborhoods. One widely held account suggests the builders who first solved this problem were not architects, but fishermen. Along the coastal communities of the Seto Inland Sea in Hiroshima Prefecture, boat builders had noticed something unusual about planks that had been partially burned in dock fires. Those planks resisted saltwater and repelled the marine borers that would ordinarily hollow out a hull within a few years. Not only that, but they also held together far longer when exposed to a fire. So the fishermen began doing it deliberately, charring their timber before they used it. Eventually, the practice moved inland, where land builders adapted it for buildings that needed protecting from a different but equally relentless enemy, the subtropical humidity of the inland sea coast, which rotted untreated wood from the outside in. The technique they developed became known as Yakisugi, from the Japanese words for burnt and cedar. And what those builders understood, without the benefit of a chemistry lab or a peer-reviewed journal, was that fire, applied with precision, could transform wood into something that was no longer really wood at all. The reason Yakisugi is such an effective protective method for treating wood is due to something that is happening on the molecular level. Wood is made up of three primary organic compounds: cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. Cellulose and hemicellulose are carbohydrate chains, meaning they are built from sugars and starches. They are, in other words, food for fungi, mold, and termites. It's even fuel for fire itself, because the same compounds that rot are the ones that burn. Lignin, on the other hand, is the structural binder that holds the wood's fibers together, and it is considerably more resistant than either of the other two. When you subject the surface of a timber plank to intense, controlled flame, the heat breaks down the cellulose and hemicellulose in the outer layer without burning through to the structural core. The process is called pyrolysis, controlled burning that breaks down the surface without consuming it. What remains is a layer of almost pure carbon, between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch deep, that is chemically inert. Think of that charred layer as a shield. Carbon does not rot, termites cannot burrow, and fungi have nothing to feed on. Not only that, but water finds almost no way in, because the pores in the wood's surface have closed and hardened under the heat, creating a hydrophobic barrier that reduces moisture absorption by roughly 80 to 90% compared to untreated timber. And of course, because the volatile fuel compounds have already been consumed, the surface has a significantly higher ignition point than raw wood, meaning it slows the spread of fire rather than feeding it. The traditional method for achieving this is deceptively simple. 3 cedar planks are bound together with wire to form a triangular chimney. Then, kindling is lit at the base, and the triangular shape creates a natural flue drawing the flame upward at high velocity and concentrating the heat evenly across the interior faces of all three boards simultaneously. The burn lasts anywhere from 60 seconds to 5 minutes, depending on the depth of char required. When the correct carbonization is reached, the planks are unbound and immediately quenched with water to halt the thermal reaction. They are dried, optionally brushed to reveal the grain underneath, and finished with a coat of natural oil to seal the surface. The result is a building material that has done something no chemical treatment achieves. It has removed the very things that cause wood to fail. And the proof of the brilliance of this system is standing somewhere in Japan right now. One of those neighborhoods is Saga Toriyamoto, near Kyoto, a historically preserved district from the Edo period. The charred cedar siding on its oldest structures has been in place for nearly 400 years. It has silvered and weathered to a quiet gray patina, but the wood beneath has not rotted, and the structural integrity underneath remains intact. And in Nara Prefecture, the Horyuji Temple complex, originally founded in the early 7th century, had portions of its wooden exterior that have shown the long-term durability characteristic of carbonized timber, surviving multiple subsequent fires over the following centuries with minimal damage. These are not restorations. They are the original material, still doing its job. And when you put that against what the Western market has been selling, the numbers are difficult to ignore. When researchers have measured the performance of Yakisugi against modern alternatives, the difference is remarkable. Documented service life estimates for authentic Yakisugi range from 80 to 100 years, with minimal maintenance, in climates of sustained humidity and seasonal temperature swings. CCA-treated timber, the chemical pressure treatment that became the Western standard, carries a typical residential service life of 15 to 25 years before replacement is generally recommended. And from a cost perspective, over 50 years, authentic Yakisugi at $8 to $14 per square foot works out cheaper in total cost than standard cedar siding, which requires professional restaining every 5 to 7 years at $2,000 to $5,000 per treatment before a full replacement at the 50-year mark. So why then, if Japan invented a method that treated wood that is not only superior but also cheaper and longer lasting, has no one in the Western building industry adopted this? The answer begins in 1933, when an Indian chemist named Santi Kamsam patented a wood preservation process called chromated copper arsenate, known simply as CCA. The formula involved forcing a solution of copper, chromium, and arsenic into the cellular structure of timber under high pressure in a sealed cylinder. The copper acted as a fungicide, the arsenic as an insecticide, and the chromium as a fixing agent to hold both compounds inside the wood. It worked, and crucially, it worked at an industrial scale, which meant it could be manufactured, certified, and sold by the millions of board feet. By the 1950s, the American Wood Preservers Institute and allied trade associations had successfully lobbied for CCA's adoption into national building codes across the United States. Those codes defined approved wood preservation in terms of chemical content, specifically which compounds had been pressure impregnated into the timber and at what concentrations. Essentially, building codes had been written to accommodate chemical treatment, with considerable industry influence. And Yakisugi didn't fit the framework, so it was left out. The replacement cycle this created was not a side effect, it was the product. A building material that lasts 100 years with zero maintenance is just a single sale to the companies that sell building materials. A material that fails within 15 years is worth 4 or 5. The American wood preservation industry was structured around treatment plants, retailers, and retreatment services, a market that has grown to around $3.17 billion in 2026. But there's another significant cost of chemically treated wood that many people are completely unaware of. CCA-treated lumber contains arsenic compounds, comprising roughly 20% of its formulation by weight. Studies found that soil beneath CCA-treated decks can accumulate arsenic at 10 to 20 times normal background levels. Research, cited by environmental health groups, found that children playing daily on CCA-treated playground equipment could be exposed to arsenic levels significantly exceeding EPA drinking water standards. In Florida, dozens of playgrounds were closed over this exact concern. In 2003, the EPA and the lumber industry agreed to discontinue CCA for most residential applications, including playground equipment, decks, and fencing. Yet it remains the standard for industrial and agricultural applications, and the building code framework written around chemical treatment remains quietly in place. If you want to trade chemically treated lumber for the natural alternative of Yakisugi on your own home or project, then it is possible. But there are a few things worth knowing before you start. First of all, Yakisugi can be bought in specialist lumber yards, so you don't need to make it if you don't want to. If you are looking to buy rather than make, you should know that Yakisugi is referred to as Shosugi-ban in Western society. Not the correct terminology, but a reference commonly used nonetheless. Authentic Yakisugi products are also available through specialist importers, with Nakamoto Forestry being the largest North American distributor of traditionally produced Yakisugi. Expect to pay between $8 and $15 per square foot, which is comparable to premium cedar or fiber cement. It sounds steep, but the cost advantage is not in the purchase price. It is in the decades of maintenance costs you will never pay. For smaller projects, or if you want to produce your own, the traditional triangular flue method is achievable with basic fire safety equipment and timber dried to a moisture content of between 10 and 15%. Western red cedar is the most accessible species with comparable grain structure and natural rot resistance to traditional Japanese cedar. Move the flame evenly across the surface until a uniform carbon layer forms. For the most durable finish, look for the alligator skin texture, a deep crackle pattern that indicates sufficient char depth has been reached. Quench immediately with water, allow to dry fully, and finish with a coat of linseed or tung oil to seal the surface. For exterior cladding in a modern building envelope, install over furring strips to create a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch air gap between the charred face and the weather barrier behind it. This allows the back of the board to breathe and dry, preventing the trapped moisture that causes problems in tightly sealed modern walls. Use stainless steel fasteners, pre-drilled, because the charred surface can be brittle at the edges. Today there is a modern revival happening, which was started by this man, Terunobu Fujimori, a Japanese architect. His work has inspired a whole new movement in the area of Yakisugi, and as a result, many modern buildings are now adopting this old method. From garden pods to whole house treatments, and even commercial buildings. But bureaucracy might be the biggest barrier to implementing this in your home. Because Western building codes do not have a standardized performance category for surface carbonized timber, you may need to work with your local building department to get a Yakisugi exterior approved on a permitted project. Yakisugi is a process built from 3 planks of cedar, a piece of wire, and the precise observation that fire, applied with control, removes the only things that make wood impermanent. A lot of what this channel covers was nearly lost, not because it stopped working, but because the industry moved on to something more profitable. If this is the kind of thing that matters to you, subscribing and sharing is the simplest way to make sure it keeps being found. And if you want to discover how one man turned a pile of rotting sticks into a free backyard power plant that generated enough energy to power his house, car, and garden, then that video is up next.